Hey guys, hope you're all here to hear about robots. That's what we're talking about today. I'm John Danner from Dunce Capital. We have an awesome panel today. Several people who've raised really silly amounts of money, and a couple startups, so a wide variety. So on your board here, we're actually in order. So Paul is right here, then Sharmi, Elnaz, Vikas, and Jason. Pretty much everybody except for Elnaz is focused on STEM instruction with their robots. Elnaz is focused on language learning, so we'll talk a little bit about that. All of these companies are, I think all, we'll find out, are both selling to consumers and possibly schools. Is that true for everybody? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So what we're going to do, we've got 35 minutes. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then if you guys can think up some good ones, you probably know as much or more than me about robots. I was really honest with these guys. This is not my field of specialization, so I'm learning as we go. Here we go. All right, so first question. I'll play the professional cynic here, and anybody can jump in and answer. Why do students actually need robots? Why can't you do a lot of this stuff on screen or by other means? Anybody jump in?
Good.
Yeah, I'll take this one, John.
Yeah?
So learning is essentially a multidisciplined experience, right? And we know that when you learn by doing, it's way more powerful than simply watching someone talk about a subject matter. And we live in a world that's physical. So if you're learning about digital concepts that come to life in the physical world, it's a way more impactful form of education. So using robotics is a fantastic way to bring the lessons of computer science as well as make all lessons that much more hands-on and memorable. But I'm sure you guys have similar things to say.
I think one thing that I would add to that, so our focus is on K-5 especially. And when we started the company, our mission was and continues to be to help every child learn to code. And there was research which showed that at that age especially, when the cognitive skills are not as developed as the older ages, or the motor skills are not as defined, hands-on play, physical interaction with physical products is actually a really great learning tool for all the same reasons that Paul mentioned. So that's why we do what we do, which is these robots are critical to that learning skill. The other part that we also find is robots are a great way to take kids out of just a two-dimensional world of a screen. It brings social interaction that's a lot more compelling, teamwork, and all that's critical aspect of learning. You learn as much with other students as you learn just from a device.
Cool.
So for us, it's a little bit different because our age range is much younger, starting from age 3. And what we've seen throughout the research we've done is actually working on the screen is a little bit damaging to their health, to their eyes, especially as they grow up. When they're older, it's okay, but at young age, it's really important not to constantly focus on big devices, big screens. So, and also I agree with everybody else that emotional bond that kids can actually have with a robot that looks like a friend, it's cute, they can play with it, it's just a very different experience.
Cool. And that's your cute robot?
Yes,
right?
it is.
Awesome. So, probably the people in this room are bigger believers in robots than I am, but I'm going to continue to ask these kind of cynic questions. What I'd love to hear is a story about a student using your robot that makes it clear why a robot is a special and different way for a student to learn. Maybe a student that was having challenges, et cetera, just to get a flavor of what can a robot unlock in learning that would be difficult?
I can take that one. So, with Smart Girls, we focus on girls, really trying to get to that group of students that are kind of lagging behind, left behind. We do have a serious gender gap worldwide. And how do you get these girls excited, empowered, feeling like this is really fun for them? And one thing that we learned with, for example, our experiences with Black Girls Code is that we were the first ones to bring robots into the New York Black Girls Code groups. And so when we walked into their offices, all the computers were just sitting there, and it was very quiet. All the girls were just like inside, like coding by themselves, not speaking to each other. And then as soon as we put the robots on the floor, and it just became completely interactive and fun and social. And so you can actually kind of change the way that they started learning because of the physical object on the floor, and that everyone had different roles, and you could actually code together as a group rather than individually. And I think that being able to give that to special learners, especially girls who don't necessarily like to have individual or kind of alone time where they want to spend hours and hours sitting behind a computer screen, but can still learn at the same time.
Cool.
For us, I think we hear stories every day. One of the things we do is we host a Wonder League robotics competition. And this year, 4th year in a row, it's grown to now 35,000 children competing every year, or this year, from 69 different countries. And every time we ask students what they learned the most, what they took away from it, and it's never about programming or about robotics. It's always about teamwork. It's always about how much they have to power through problems to solve. And that really happens because of the nature of the problem itself, which is robots in a physical environment. Yeah. And the one story or episode I remember is this team of girls from Michigan, Heartland, Michigan, small town, where the girls couldn't compete in the robotics competition for Lego because their brothers wouldn't let them compete. So these girls formed a team, and they competed in Wonder League, and they went on to win the worldwide championship. And so we were going to give them a $5,000 STEM grant, but because this is girls from home, so we sponsored their trip to go to the Lego finals. And the funny thing was their brothers didn't get to go. So those are the kind of stories that we see of success all the time.
That's awesome. Cool. So as I mentioned, all of you have chosen both to sell to consumers and to schools. Traditionally selling to schools is a pretty painful thing. It's difficult. People in this audience probably know as well as I do that schools are not the easiest consumer of new products like this. Why is it that you've chosen to sell to schools as opposed to just focus on consumer market? Jason, you want to start?
So I think the reason is that right now the school market is the biggest market because we know that STEM education is a very new thing, and it's mainly from government that drive these things. So for normal consumers, they can't realize the value of a STEM robot, especially this is is more expensive than ordinary toys. So first, I think the school market is the biggest market, but for us, we are always looking forward to explore the consumer market. But the consumer market is very hard because you need to deliver a product that can let the students learn without anyone to help them. But in schools, we have teachers. Yeah. In family, we don't have anyone. So we need a very good content together with the product. And the price will also need to be very good. But I think in the future, the consumer market will be a very, very big market. Yeah.
So when we first started out, we were still focused on both consumer and education. And our take was, in order to succeed in consumer, we wanted to make sure that we bring a lot of credibility to the product. So we felt making sure it succeeds in education and actually has that halo effect, if you will, and the credibility we could earn by making it work well in the classroom is how we started out. But over time, we've also realized there are a couple of other benefits to being in education. And the biggest one that we find is impact, where not every family, not every child can possibly afford to have a robot in their home. And if we believe this is the best way for them to learn, how can we reach a much larger audience? So that impact, we work, for example, with a lot of Title I schools. We today in more than 3,300 school districts around the country. And a lot of students that we touch who experience the robots, who succeed with them, they're able to do it because these robots found their way into the school. So they didn't have to pay for it as much. So that impact is a huge benefit.
It's not hard to sell to schools. I mean, we're all successful at doing it. It turns out that our average time to close a deal is 37 days.
That's
right?
pretty great.
And it's our average deal is $2,000 to $3,000 per school. But the thing that makes it hard is there's a pace of adoption. So it's not like you're going to go from 10 million in sales to 100 million in sales in 1 year. You just have to have the patience for the schools to understand your value proposition and what you're bringing. Because there is money for this, and it is a worldwide trend where the schools want to teach this type of subject matter, and they need the tools to do it, and robots are one of the essential tools in order to teach STEM and STEAM-based education. So you have to be comfortable with the pace of the market, but there is money there, and it's a good market to sell to.
To add to that, actually, based on my experience, I actually see working with schools is getting easier than it was before. They are more receptive to the fact that the new technology is coming out and they really need to get into the space. And it also really depends on where you find these partners. At least for us, where we see it is, it's a little bit difficult for us to work with the schools in the US because of many rules and regulations, which is fine, but there are some countries outside that they've been pretty friendly and welcoming to try out our robot as pilots, some of them like Finland, in Japan, Singapore. So I think the fact that it's difficult now, it's almost getting away. It's just a matter of finding the right partner. And the reason to do it through schools is we really want to change the system, how the kids actually learn, by personalizing the education through their abilities. So we have to be in a larger group, get feedback from students as well as the teachers.
I mean, I'd have to agree on that in the sense that, traditionally you think of robots only in computer science classes, but something that we're coming out with Smart Buddies is looking at social emotional learning and saying, okay, you can use this in an English class. And because teachers want to be able to use the robots in other classes and throughout and be able to integrate STEM in English, in French class, even our apps in French. We've seen some schools using it, to teach French in, a fun way, in history, and also, of course, in math. So how can you take the same product and be able to spread it out to 5 or 6 teachers and 5 or 6 classes?
Makes sense. Cool. So I'm sure everybody here knows about COPPA and all of the requirements that it imposes on privacy. That seems like that might be a difficult thing in the world that you guys live in, with the amount of data that you are collecting, et cetera. So we don't need everybody to answer this, but one or two of you, how have you navigated COPPA and kind of, dealt with that and still made your product great and personalized?
Well, COPPA is essentially US, and then you have GDPR, which is EU, and then you have other regional things. You just follow the rules, right? It's like, it's not, yes, it's restrictive, so you can't, blast email the kid saying, buy this new thing and, give us your money and go get your parents' credit card. Even though we all would like to, but you can't. And so you just have to follow the rules. So you have to dedicate resources to that, and you have to architect your system so it takes into consideration what the rules are. And it's really in the best interest of the kid, right? You don't want to have the kid at the front end of all of our marketing efforts. But it is an extra burden that you have to put on, and you have to manage the systems, and it's just work you need to do. And you need to make that investment.
With artificial intelligence, though, and I think the amount of data that it requires to take in, I think that will change things. Don't you agree?
No, it's to the extent that you are collecting data and you use it for your business purposes beyond the improvement of the product. Everything is anonymized, that I'm sure all of us are doing. Everything is aggregated, so you can't figure out that little Johnny and little Sally, use their robot today. But I just think it's just what you have to deal with in today's environment. It's just, part of doing business, just like...
I think in COPPA, one thing is specifically to that question you asked, especially applies to collecting personal identified information, so PII data. And so we've embraced COPA and all the rules very early on, largely because I don't want to build a product that I wouldn't be comfortable using as a parent, right? So we apply very strict rules ourselves as to what product we want to bring to life. So as an example, children create programs, they write programs, and they want to share it with the world. So how do you now enable that sharing and yet make it such that children can't, even by accident, put in information that identifies them, their name, their something or the other. And we're going to go to great lengths to do that. So as Paul said, you have to build in rules into your culture for one. This is not what we do, this is not what we're about. And then you architect the systems in a way which prevent us from kind of violating that. As an example, children today, like I mentioned, 35,000 teams competing around the world, they're sharing programs all the time, but they're sharing in a way where none of that information ever gets leaked, even by accident, by someone.
But to add to that, based on what we can see in terms of talking with the parents, one thing that we decided to do in our product is to give parents the ability to turn off some of the features, let them know inside the app or our newsletters, instructions, that okay, these are the things that we're collecting, and you have full control over turning off the features, turning it on, and giving them the option to actually feel comfortable sharing what sort of a data. Of course, if they turn off some of the features, the robot is not going to have the functionality we hope, right. But we also let them know, what they get based on the functionalities they turn on and off.
Yep.
Recently, we developed a product in our new project that I think we know the effect of the COPA. So in China, we don't have this kind of GDPR or COPA, this kind of things. So in China, there's one kind of robot which is very popular with a screen, with a camera. They can do a lot of things. They can use AI, newest AI technology. The kids can ask any questions. Yeah, so this kind of robot is very popular in China, but we found this kind of probably isn't exist in the US market. So when we start a project that cooperates with a brand in the US to develop a robot like this, but we know that along with COPA, there are a lot of limitations. Like we can't use the online AI, we just needed. We just can allow to use the offline version. So we need to add a switch on the camera, on microphone, the physical switch, a lot of things. Yeah. So I think this you need to allow to follow this rule and to develop product.
Isn't it also more difficult as a Chinese company operating in the United States with collecting data? We saw that with Grindr and with others that the policies are changing and the climate is changing for Chinese companies.
Yeah, it's very sensitive. So we are very careful about this. Yeah.
Interesting. So one other thing that was curious to me is most of you are building robots that are kind of focused on kind of lower grade levels, kind of K-8. So my daughter, who's finishing high school now, is in first robotics. That's kind of an age where a lot of kids can really do some interesting things with programming of robots, but it doesn't seem to be a market that's been addressed as much, frankly, as younger kids. Why is that? Why have you guys not gone after that yet?
Well, we are. We recognize that as well, and we just launched our newest product on Kickstarter called the Rover, which is a robotic platform with a really cool integrated control system. It's the same control system that's in all of our other robots, but it's exposed so the child or the young adult can put on a Raspberry Pi or Arduino or microbit to build on top of it. I think historically you've seen robotics in high school kind of fall into that after-school programs, into the competitions or into the robotics club. And it's just the opportunity around STEM education lends itself really nicely to really self-contained robotics, right? And so once you start building bigger platforms similar to what Jason is doing, you have to, the spectrum of what you need in order to satisfy their needs is very, very broad. And so you need a bunch of little things for whatever they may have in mind.
Got it.
And so I think you'll see some tightening of that as CS curriculum starts becoming part of more and more high schools, not just AP computer science, but something that all students are having to focus on. And hopefully companies like us are going to build platforms like that that really support that learning.
Is anyone else kind of building or thinking about building for high school?
We aren't, but I think we made a very conscious choice when we founded the company to focus on K-5.
Yeah.
And the reason was when we were looking at this, we saw news from Estonia back in 2012 where Estonia mandated their first graders to learn to code. This is before any other country, anyone else, Code.org hadn't launched at that time. So seeing that, the thought question that it prompted to me was, isn't that too young? Like a 6-year-old, 7-year-old learning to code. But then there's research that I found which showed that kids can actually learn that at that age. And yet the research showed that the kids needed a tangible product and no one had built the right product. So all the products you mentioned, like Mindstorms and other that existed until then, were only catering to middle or high school. So there wasn't any product that catered to K-5, and yet there's research which showed these kids are perfectly capable of learning. So that's the gap we directly sought out to address, and that's what we've been doing.
I mean, for us, it was really looking at the data and saying that 65% of girls by age 13 decide that STEM is not for them.
Yeah.
So we had to focus
late
on
by
yeah,
then.
exactly. So
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
focusing on teenage girls. It's not going to be a way to catch them. We had to catch them early and as soon as possible, basically, before they reach that age.
That's a good segue, Sharmi, into kind of girls and for everyone in general. Like, how do they interact with robots in a different way, or how do you have to provide different tools or functions for girls as opposed to boys?
Yeah, I mean, we've really looked at the research on this, and also girls and specifically minorities and how they interact with mathematics and coding and and education in general. And one thing we've noticed is that storytelling is really important. The context for the girl is very important. She needs to know why she's doing something. Boys will happily mess around and be able to do a maze and have it dry and just look at the coolness of the object on the floor, and they're very comfortable with spatial reasoning. Girls are more interested in and why I'm doing it, and they need to create a story around it. So that's why all of our robots have dolls on them, they have characters, they have books. You can create an entire universe and code within that universe. And then, they also have books, so you get to know your character and you kind of create an entire fantasy around your coding.
And I think I would second that. I think giving girls a higher purpose of why they're solving a problem is a great tool to engage them. So in our Wonder League robotics competition, for example, every year we've noticed around 47% of participants are girls. And it's not by accident. So even ranging from the design of the robot. So when we were first testing our prototypes with girls and boys, we would often ask girls, do you want to play with it? What do you think? Very often we would hear from girls, it's my brother's toy, it's not for me. And we would ask them why, they wouldn't articulate it. But once we asked them, what does it look like? Very often girls would say, it looks like a car or a truck. And for us, that was a revelation as to children bring preconceived notions to anything they do. So that's why we designed the robots so that it looks unlike anything on this planet. It has 3 legs, it has 1 eye. So it kind of creates a challenge for a child to bring their own perception, their own imagination to play. And that's really led us to bridging that gap between both girls and boys at all ages.
Yeah, and what we've seen is, so we don't have products that go that young, right? So our products start a little older. And for us, essentially having a blank canvas allows us to take on anything that the child wants it to take on. So we see a very even split inside the classroom between boys and girls, but not at the younger age. We used to make a bunch of toys for a large media company, and we came to the conclusion that characters are will quickly fall into a particular gender. If you put a doll on a product, it's going to be very girls. If you make it something look like a race car, it's going to be very boys. But when you get older, you don't need to keep playing to those gender stereotypes. You can give the child a blank canvas and they'll impart meaning to it. So all of our products are kind of generic and they're just tools. Use it as a tool to figure out what you want. But you can sell a tool once they have that cognitive understanding of what a tool is. At the younger ages, they don't. So we skew older, but we've purposely stepped away from characters at this age.
So I'm going to ask my final question. So if people are thinking of questions, get ready. Here it comes. So this last question for me is for Elnaz. Everybody else on this panel is going after STEM and coding, which would be the more obvious, probably, use of robots. You're going after language learning. Why did you decide to do that?
Very good question. Thank you. First of all, it's a very challenging area. If you look at the trends in the market, there hasn't been much focus on early childhood education. Gradually, it's getting better and better. And when it comes to language learning, learning a language helps kids to communicate and learn about any other skills available, when they grow up. So it's a building block of learning about anything. And at a young age, when you look at the products on the market, you don't see a utilization of technology, and especially AI, into this category to help young children to learn more and also implement other skills on top of that. So it was a difficult decision. It's very challenging because there are not much resource available for us. Right now, the R&D team is working really hard to gather data. And that means, especially that when the kids talk, they talk very differently than adults. The words are very different. So for one word, we have like 5, 6 variations that we need to utilize, and still we are collecting data. But that data is going to help us to understand more about children's speech pattern, talkativeness, and help them as they grow, because the statistics show, because parents don't have a lot of time to spend with the kids, and as they learn through conversation, we would be an assistant to parents and teachers at that young age by developing a tool for language learning.
That's cool. Very
Thank
good.
you.
All right. Will somebody that knows a lot more about robots than me ask the first question?
So the topic is special education. How does robotics and curricula impact this special population of students?
Okay, so I'll repeat the question. In special education, how does the area of robotics kind of affect and impact the special education?
So I can at least very briefly talk about it. I'm sure we all have elements to add. So we haven't particularly focused on special ed or special needs in some form, but one thing we've seen is because these robots have such characters and personalities, they have the ability to engage students where often humans can't. And it is mostly by serendipity and by accident we've seen this. So we've seen them being used in many different aspects of special education that we didn't design for or plan for. But this is just a tool that's been effectively used by teachers and in those scenarios. And largely because these robots come with no judgment being applied. They're largely a tool, and it becomes malleable in the hands of a child. So whoever the child is. And that's a great comfort to any child, whether it's, especially in special ed. So that's what we've seen. So, we're lucky to see that, but I don't think we designed for it.
Robots are patient, as you mentioned. They don't judge, and especially if we utilize AI, and when the focus is actually on the kid himself or herself, the abilities shine, and there is no longer this discussion about disabilities. So that's how they can help to empower children about their abilities and what they can do.
Other questions, please?
While
Okay.
you're waiting for a question, I'll tell you one story, which is this one kid, we heard the story from the teacher, says this kid had never smiled. Their parents had not seen this kid smile for years. And then this teacher introduced robots to the environment, and for the first time, the parents saw their kid smile and interact with the robot. And that was a breakthrough, and the parents were crying to see that happen. So that's something that these characters can bring out that you didn't expect at times.
I mean, one thing we've seen with autism is that autistic students specifically love like coding programs and love to work with robotics. And so you can see like there's a lot of studies, not the studies we've done, but studies that I've read that were quite interesting actually, that started us going down a path of looking at how we could create additional curriculum for them. So, yes.
As an educational robot, how important do you think the sensor capability or visual capability is in your robot as an educational?
So the question is, for educational robots, how important are the sensor capabilities, the visual capabilities to your robots?
I think at the end of the day, the question is, what is the child doing with it? And how do they apply it to whatever forms of learning they're doing? So take, for example, camera or visual aspects. That technology to bring it to life in a robot, in a classroom or any setting will be a certain amount of cost that goes in. So they'll have to pay for it. The question is, do you see enough benefit in learning being applied? And if so, and is the cost kind of matches that, then it's a great tool to bring, because any new sensor, any new technology you put in there will lead to new forms of exploration, beyond doubt. The question is it meaningful enough, and is there enough depth of learning there that a child can use it in? Then sure.
Yeah. And then you have to go back to the question about COPPA and GDPR.
Yeah, exactly.
Cameras are inherently problematic when you're trying to do anything with children. And it's, you know, how you process the image is going to be, you know, a big issue when it comes to it. Like if you want to process the image all locally, you're going to spend a lot more on building that product. And if you want to send it up to the cloud, then you're going to trip all sorts of regulatory issues. So cameras are problematic, but they could be very powerful. It's just, are you willing to pay for them? And that's a big thing for all of us, is just making sure that our products are affordable. Because we all could build a $1,000 robot and we would, you know, we wouldn't be sitting here, right?
Yeah, for us it's a little bit different because you know, we do have the camera and it does detect the kid's face in order to interact with them. Because what happens with young children is after a while they just don't want to interact with their toy and something that they used to play with it. So what the camera does, it detects their face and it can call them by name, initiate conversations. So for what we do, it's a very, very important aspect. And also having a touch sensor in the robot, it creates that emotional bond because it can show emojis, pictures, you know, when they touch the head or the body. So again, it has different use cases, but at least for us, even though with the regulations, this is very difficult, but we'd rather to keep it.
Yeah, so the question is, what have the challenges been with teacher adoption and how have you worked through those? Jason, you want to take a shot at that?
I think now in the robotics classroom is a very big challenge for nowadays teachers. Yeah, but I think but today's coaches, teachers, if they can work as a mentor, not a traditional teacher. The traditional teacher needs to know everything, needs to solve every problem. But now in the STEM classroom, I think the teacher, if he can be a good mentor, he can ask good questions. He can lead how to find solutions for problems.
A good guide and coach.
Yeah.
But that's a hard thing for teachers sometimes to not be the sage.
I mean, many of us started out in retail, meaning that we went direct to consumer, and so it means that we made products that were easy for a child to learn by themselves and teach themselves coding, basically. I mean, that was like the goal for our product. And so if a child can do it on their own, then a teacher can most certainly learn how to do it. So we found that that's been really helpful for teacher adoption. It's like, hey, you know, it's worked with thousands of kids already.
But I think it's an important point, which is to grow the market. I think that one of the biggest problems that all of us will have to solve along the way is to get teachers comfortable with teaching coding or introducing that learning in the classroom. So if I ask a teacher to teach Spanish and they don't know Spanish, they won't feel comfortable at all teaching Spanish. But when you ask them to teach coding, it's the same reaction. I don't know how to code. How do I teach coding or computer science to a teacher, to a kids? But I think if they start to explain, they find that actually what Jason said, they can be guides and coaches and catalysts to that learning a lot better. They don't have to be as much of an expert at coding. And two, we all have to, and we are all investing in aspects of teacher training and professional development. So we do very active work on how do we get more teachers trained, comfortable with using these products, comfortable with teaching computer science to kids, and how do they themselves get trained to a level where they feel they're much better at it than they were before.
Last word, Paul, you good?
I just commend everyone for building awesome products. I think these tools will really bring to life computer science and teach kids the skills they need. And we need more robots.
Yes.
Likewise, thank you, panelists. That was a
All
great
right, thank
session.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.